The film begins when two twin boys named Samaritan and Nemesis are born in Granite City. The two boys are considered prodigies because they have extraordinary physical strength, like superhumans. One day when they accidentally hurt some of the city's criminals with their bare hands, the townspeople began to fear and thought that they could endanger their lives. Therefore, one night all the townspeople gathered and burned the twins' family home together, killing their parents. Luckily, Nemesis and Samaritan managed to survive the fire, but both have very different personalities and values. Samaritan grew up as a child who fought for justice and always protected those who needed help like a superhero. Meanwhile, Nemesis grew up with feelings of immense hatred and always held a grudge against the townspeople who had killed his parents. Nemesis intends to burn the entire town in a huge fire so that they all feel the suffering that his parents endured. Before executing his plan, he realized his decision forced him to fight against his twin brother. Therefore, he took the initiative to make a strong iron hammer forged with hatred and anger. That night, when he was about to blow up the town's power plant and start a huge fire, Samaritan also came to prevent him, and the fight between the two was unavoidable. In the battle between the brothers, Nemesis seemed superior because he had an iron hammer, which claimed to be the only weapon that could defeat Samaritan. The fight did not last long because a sudden violent explosion occurred in that place and killed both of them. However, many people believe that the Samaritan survived the explosion and chose to live in hiding. This is because the police only found a charred corpse with Nemesis's mask after the fire incident. The scene changes to 25 years after the fight between Samaritan and Nemesis. A teenage boy named Sam is one of the biggest fans of the heroic and brave acts of Samaritan decades ago. Over the past year, he has always suspected some old man as Samaritan. The rumored Samaritan survived and is still alive today. One of the men Sam suspects to be Samaritan is Joe Smith, an elderly man who lives in the apartment across from his apartment and currently works as a repairman for broken electronics. Joe is actually an apathetic man who is often alone and lives his daily life as a garbage man in Granite City. Currently, Sam only lives with his mother, Tiffany, who works as a nurse at a hospital in the city. One day, he had trouble getting into his apartment because his mother still had not paid the monthly rent, so Sam decided to wait for his mother while drawing on the terrace. While busy drawing, his male friend, Jesse, invites him to steal some sodas and a coil of copper wire in an old, long-abandoned apartment. Since he needed money, Sam accepted the invitation, and they immediately sneaked into the apartment that was their target. After collecting the copper wires, Sam and Jesse try to sell them to a junkyard run by a man named Cyrus. However, because he received very little money, Sam was forced to accept a job from one of Cyrus' men named Reza. That night, Sam is assigned to distract a shopkeeper so Reza and the others can retrieve the box of lottery tickets. At first, he seemed hesitant because he had never done anything like that before, but he chose to do it because of the urgency of his financial situation. Unfortunately, after they succeeded to steal it, Reza and his friends took the wrong box. Reza, annoyed, threw the blame on Sam and refused to pay him. Hearing that, he angrily denied the accusations and asked Reza to give the money according to their previous agreement. Cyrus, who saw the incident, looked amazed and appreciated Sam's courage in giving the $200 to him. While seeing his book, Cyrus realizes that Sam is a fan of Samaritan, so he tells Sam that he is also a fan of one of the twins. But unlike him, Cyrus is a fan of Nemesis because he thinks that Samaritan only protects those who enjoy wealth over the suffering of the poor. In the evening, when Sam returns, he sees his mother fighting with the man who owns the apartment over the unpaid rent. He immediately handed over the money from Cyrus to the man who owned the rental so they could go back into their apartment. After entering the room, his mother, Tiffany, immediately asked where he could get the money because she was worried that he had stolen the money. Hearing that, Sam tried to convince her that he did not steal the money and got it from selling some copper he found on the side of the road. The next day, Reza and his friends suddenly attack Sam because he wants to avenge Sam for what happened yesterday. Reza threatens him to hand over the money given by Cyrus yesterday or else they will beat him to a pulp. Knowing that, Sam had no choice but to run as fast as possible to escape their pursuit. When Sam reaches the apartment yard, he is almost caught and beaten by Reza and the others. Luckily, Joe, who happened to be in that place, managed to help him defeat all of them. Joe managed to repulse and defeat them without effort, and he was even able to catch Reza's knife without being scratched. That afternoon, Sam tries to spy on Joe with a pair of binoculars and finds burn marks all over Joe's back. This made him even more convinced that Joe was the legend he had been looking for all this time. The next day, Sam meets a male writer named Albert, known to be a Samaritan fan because all the books he wrote tell the story of Samaritan and Nemesis. For the last dozen years, Albert has tried to gather evidence from various articles and newspapers to find out the whereabouts of Samaritan because he also believes that Samaritan is still alive. That day, Sam reported to Albert about his suspicion that Joe, who lived across from his apartment, was Samaritan. But even though Sam had shown the knife that had been bent by Joe, Albert still doesn't believe his words and asks him to gather more evidence. On the other hand, Cyrus and his lover, Syl, plan to steal Nemesis's mask at the police station using a special blackout bomb. The bomb can create a large explosion and cause all signals and electric currents to be off within a certain radius. After Cyrus' henchmen, Farshad, finished preparing their equipment and weapons, they immediately rushed to the police station. They disguised themselves as police officers so their stunt could easily reach the entrance. After arriving at their destination, they threw the blackout bomb into the guard booth so they could turn off all communication signals and CCTV at the police station. After they managed to break into the warehouse where all the evidence was confiscated, they took Nemesis' mask and iron hammer. Strangely, when Cyrus touched the iron hammer, Joe suddenly felt something different, as if he was directly connected to the iron hammer. After successfully stealing Nemesis's mask and iron hammer, Cyrus tried to destroy the Samaritan's mask using Nemesis' iron hammer, and the incident again gave Joe a bad feeling. The next day when Joe leaves the house, Sam sneaks into his house to find out if he is the Samaritan. At first, Sam still hasn't found anything suspicious in Joe's house, but after he sees a clipping book full of articles about the heroic actions of Samaritans, he begins to believe that Joe is the Samaritan. Sam decides to steal the clipping book to show it to Albert later and prove that all his suspicions have been true. Unfortunately, not long after that, Joe came to Sam's apartment and told Tiffany that Sam had taken his book. Because of that, Sam had no other choice but to return the book to him. The next day when Sam meets with Joe, he asks why Joe is collecting so many articles about Samaritan. Joe replied that he did that because he was a fan of Samaritan like Sam. He denied Sam's suspicions that Samaritan was still alive because he was quite sure that Samaritan had died in a fire several decades ago. In the middle of their conversation, Joe was suddenly hit by a car that drives so fast that he was thrown onto the asphalt quite hard. It turns out that the car was driven by Reza and his friends because they wanted revenge for what Joe did to them the other day. Sam immediately tried to approach Joe and help him because he was sure no human could survive a hit like that. But strangely, Joe managed to get back up and recover all the bones that had been crushed very easily. Joe immediately rushed to his apartment to soak his body in ice water because the recovery process he experienced always produced heat, making his body emit steam. Sam tried to help by turning on the cold water and preparing ice cream for Joe so that he could recover. After witnessing the strange incident, Sam, sure that Joe was Samaritan, immediately asked him many questions about Samaritan. He chose not to answer any of the questions and offered Sam some ice cream because he wasn't interested in talking about all that. On the other hand, Cyrus started his plan to carry out terror in the center of the city by blowing up several shops using blackout bombs. After that, he took the rest of the city's bums into an alley and announced that he would start a new revolution to return power to the weak people. Everyone in the place cheered loudly and supported what he did because they were fed up with the city government, which had neglected them in difficult times. Back to Sam, who recently started following Joe everywhere and asked a few questions about his and Nemesis's past. At first, Joe felt uncomfortable and disturbed by Sam, who continued interviewing him like a reporter because he had always lived peacefully alone. However, their relationship grew closer over time, and Joe began to get used to Sam's presence in his life. He slowly opens up to Sam and wants to tell Sam about his fading strength due to his age. The night before they returned to their respective homes, he offered to repair Sam's broken watch as a token of their friendship. The next day, Joe sees the news on television broadcasting various cases of rioting and looting in various shops carried out by someone wearing a Nemesis mask. Seeing this, he felt shocked and angry because someone else had pretended to be Nemesis and committed various crimes throughout the city. In the afternoon, when Joe met with Sam, he immediately asked Joe for help so that he would teach him how to fight and defend himself. After Sam returned from school, Joe took him to the apartment's roof and practiced some moves together. He seemed impressed by Sam's very agile moves, but Sam still had to train his courage and improve his physical strength. After training ended, Sam tried to hit Joe and ended up hurting himself because his body was very strong. While Sam treats the bruises on his hands using some of Joe's ice, he starts talking about Nemesis's death. Unfortunately, it made Joe angry and offended, so he asked Sam to return to his house. The next day, Cyrus returned to Sam and offered him some jobs that paid quite a lot. That day, Sam was assigned to stand guard and signaled to him by whistling when the police came to the place. Cyrus then begins to carry out his routines, such as bribing some police officers and executing treacherous officers. Sam, who saw all that, felt very scared and intended to run away from that place. But when he was about to leave, he saw Jesse, who was being beaten by Reza and his friends. Sam had no choice but to fight with them to save Jesse, even though, in the end, he had to be battered and fractured due to being beaten by them. That night, they took Sam, who had fainted helplessly, to Sam's apartment yard. At that moment, Reza looked surprised because he realized that the old man he had hit earlier was still alive and had no injuries. Joe immediately took Sam to the hospital and explained what had happened to him to Tiffany. Elsewhere, Reza and his gang immediately approached Cyrus and told him about Joe's power. Hearing this, Cyrus became interested in Joe and began ordering his men to bring him to their headquarters. The next day, Farshad and the rest of Cyrus' men secretly followed Joe from behind. But, realizing that he was being followed, Joe began to change direction and direct them all to a narrow alley. He allows all the members of Cyrus to consider their decision because he could hurt them. However, because they underestimated Joe and ignored his words, the fight between them was unavoidable. Although he has to fight several people at once, he can still defeat them alone. When Farshad intends to blow up the place with a blackout bomb, Joe immediately saved a girl who almost died in that place. His heroic actions were recorded by several cell phone cameras belonging to residents so that his real identity as a superhero was almost exposed. That night, many media started to report about the appearance of Samaritan in Granite City and began associating it with the appearance of Nemesis some time ago. Joe, who wants to leave this dark life, intends to leave Granite City and start a new life elsewhere. A few minutes before Joe left, Sam suddenly approached him and informed him that Cyrus was planning to detonate a bomb at the town's power plant. Sam persuades him to work together to stop Cyrus because Sam believes that Joe is the only person who can stop Cyrus. But unfortunately, he refuses to do that and immediately kicks Sam out of his apartment. The next morning, Sam sneaked back into Joe's house to retrieve the watch that had been left with him. Coinciding with that, Cyrus and his men suddenly came to his apartment, so Sam ran to the house to warn his mother about Cyrus' arrival. Unfortunately, Cyrus and his gang had arrived at Sam's apartment before Sam and his mother had time to escape. Cyrus immediately catches him and plans to use him as bait to lure Joe into coming to his headquarters. In the evening, all members of Cyrus and the city thugs began to riot by destroying shops and public property as a protest against the government. All police officers were deployed to secure the city, while some residents chose to flee or move to another city. The same thing was done by Joe, who is currently waiting for the arrival of the train at the city station to go to another city. When his train was about to arrive, he suddenly heard an alarm sound which turned out to be from Sam's watch, which he had brought with him by accident. Joe decides to postpone his departure and returns the watch to Sam. When he arrived at Sam's apartment, he was surprised by the messy condition. He saw Tiffany, who fell limp due to being hit by some of Cyrus' men. Elsewhere, Cyrus and his men appear prepared to carry out their plan by deploying several blackout bombs throughout the city. But before they could do all that, Joe had already hit them using his garbage truck. After successfully breaking into Cyrus' headquarters by force, Joe began to attack them in a very epic battle. After he meets Cyrus, Joe asks him to free Sam, and in exchange, he will have a one-on-one duel with Cyrus. But Cyrus refused the offer because he wanted to humiliate Samaritan in front of many people by teaching him to death. Those words reminded Joe of an incident in the past when he tried to save his twin brother, who was none other than Samaritan. He then reveals that he is actually Nemesis and is the person who used to be considered a criminal to the residents of the Granite City. Hearing that, Cyrus looked surprised and could not believe that the person in front of him was Nemesis, the person he had idolized so far. Shortly after, a huge explosion came from Joe's garbage truck, instantly killing most of Cyrus's men. After that incident, Cyrus and Farshad immediately took Sam with them. They started going inside the base to activate the blackout bombs they had planted at several points in the city. Meanwhile, Joe is still brutally fighting against all of Cyrus' remaining men and even killing them who intend to escape using the elevator. After that, he immediately chased and killed Farshad using a blackout bomb in Farshad's hand. After all the fierce fighting that Joe did, he finally found Sam, who was trapped in a fire. But when he was about to save Sam, Cyrus suddenly appeared wearing a Nemesis mask and immediately hit him with Nemesis' iron hammer. In a moment of crisis, Sam manages to get close to Cyrus and attack him, so Joe has a chance to attack him from behind and throw him straight into the fire. As soon as Joe managed to defeat Cyrus, he immediately led Sam to jump into the next building to avoid the explosion that would occur in that place. After that, Joe tells Sam that he is actually Nemesis, who has been known as a criminal in the city. Since Samaritan's death, he feels guilty and decides to live peacefully in hiding. Now he asks Sam to help him repair Nemesis' reputation so that Nemesis can start fighting for justice in the city as a new hero. Joe said every human being has good and bad inside of them, and there is nothing we can do to change that. But the thing we can all do is decide which path we will choose. When the media reporters arrived, Joe immediately sped off and left. Meanwhile, Sam begins to tell the media that now the real Nemesis has returned and that Nemesis will begin to save or protect the townspeople from evil. The film ends with Joe watching Sam from behind the crowd and starting to walk off in the other direction. What Joe said in his last dialogue is something we should learn from this film. Everyone in this world has good and bad, but which side we will take depends on our individual decisions.